It was a typical Monday in my office at the computer centre. 25 years ago now, I worked there as a director for software development. My telephone rang, interrupting the only quiet moment I'd had since arriving. I almost didn't answer it, but something jogged me into action. "Good morning," I said. It was Ian, head of HR. He wanted to ask me a favour. Ian was a good friend, a fellow Christian, a close neighbour in the village where we lived. "It's in connection with another member of staff in another department," he explained. "You won't know him. He has been sent home over a disciplinary matter, and there's going to be an internal hearing which I will be chairing next week." I confess to being a little uncertain as to why Ian had rung to tell me about an employee whom I didn't know. I mean, the company employed some 20,000 staff. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as I could. "He is going to need a work colleague to be with him in the hearing, and although you don't know him, I immediately thought of you. And that's why I'm calling. Brian is a fellow Christian. He's been sent home for repeatedly sharing his faith in the workplace, even when asked on several occasions by his line manager not to do so." I was silent for a moment or two. My mind began racing with all sorts of questions. I had 1,001 all at once. How had this come about? Why was sharing one's Christian faith a disciplinary issue? Why had people complained? I mean, I had often spoken about my newfound faith around the office in the past year or so. No one had complained either to me or about me. I felt a sort of surge of righteous indignation on Brian's behalf, and after a moment or two said to Ian that I would be pleased to be there for Brian. And when I met him a couple of days later, I found he was quiet, well-spoken. He'd been a Christian all his adult life, and he said he often shared his faith at work. He said that no one had ever objected before, but that he felt his line manager was picking on him. A few days later, I went along to the disciplinary hearing. My role was not to speak unless invited, but rather to be there as moral support for Brian. Ian explained that the purpose of the meeting was to establish the facts of the matter, and that once that had been done, the meeting would adjourn whilst he and two other independent managers would consider what action, if any, should be taken. Brian's boss then outlined why he had instructed Brian to go home. He explained that several members of his office team had complained that Brian was, in their words, constantly seeking to convert them to Christianity, and that they felt uncomfortable and even harassed at times, despite telling Brian, "Thank you, but no thank you." As a result, he had spoken to Brian and had asked him to save matters of faith and belief to his private time. His boss said that he had done this on several occasions, finally warning Brian that if he continued, he could be disciplined and might lose his job. As Brian's boss was speaking, I could see Brian shuffling in his seat, and at the same time, I began to sense within me a rising conviction that not only was his boss telling the truth, but that God was making it plain to me that Brian had some undisclosed reason for behaving as he had been doing, and that I needed to ask him about this. This sense of being spoken to, of a knowledge beyond myself, grew stronger and stronger until I really could contain it no longer. So I raised my hand to catch Ian's eye. "Excuse me," I said, "would it be possible to have a short break so that I could speak privately with Brian, if that's in order?" It was agreed the meeting would pause for 10 minutes, after which Brian would be invited to give his account of the matter. I went outside with Brian and said simply and directly to him that I had this powerful sense that God was speaking to me about him and that I needed to ask him if he had some other reason for behaving as he had been. I remember what happened next very clearly. Brian's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," he said, "there is. I've been trying to get time off. Life is all too much for me these days, since my wife became seriously ill. But I don't know how to do this without letting everybody else down. The team are all so busy." "Well, you simply need to go and explain," I said, "and then let it all work out as it may." We stood for a moment outside the building. I prayed for Brian and for this matter to resolve in a way that was good for everyone. And then we went back inside. The meeting reconvened. Brian was invited to present his side of the matter. But rather than doing that, he said that he needed to apologise to his boss and the rest of his department. And he then explained what had been going on in his life and why he'd been behaving as he had. Well, naturally the hearing took quite a different course. The HR department consulted with Brian's boss, who agreed to lessen his responsibilities and to give him some compassionate leave. The disciplinary complaint was withdrawn. Brian was able to continue to work part-time over some months, until sadly his wife passed away. It's all a long time ago now, but I will never forget hearing God's prompting me with his desire for the truth and his promise that no matter how difficult, things will work out for the good when we have the courage to trust him.